Excellent. Excellent. It's good to start seeing some people.
Yep.
Starting to see some faces and some pictures. We'll give everyone a few more minutes. Before we begin tonight.
Good evening, Rabbi. How are you?
I'm doing well. Who's that?
This is Carrie and Victoria standing behind me, or she was.
Okay. How you doing, Carrie? It's good to see you 2 nights in a row.
Yes, we are. It's our lucky day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, it's good to see you. You staying safe?
Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Who is that? I heard
Yeah, it was me, Robert.
Oh, hey, Robert. How you doing?
Fine, sorry. I
Hello,
just
Rabbi.
want to say good evening.
Lenny, how you doing? I see you.
How are you?
We're doing okay. You
Rabbi.
know, it's, hey, Eddie.
How are
Good
you?
evening.
Good.
Keeping busy. Keeping
Good.
busy. It's
Keep you out of trouble.
different. Yeah, exactly. Different type of busy.
Yeah.
You know, as we all are getting used to this, and a few more months, God willing, this will all be over soon. I'm sure y'all saw the good news today from Pfizer that their vaccine is even more effective than they originally thought. So hopefully by mid-spring we'll all have the vaccine, and hopefully by May, June, we'll be able to come to synagogue safely, and it's not too far away.
Hopefully.
We're past halfway, let's hope.
From your lips to God's ears, Rabbi.
Yes, exactly.
Next Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, if not earlier, but I'm very confident we'll be in synagogue for the next high holidays. Thank God for modern science. It's amazing. These vaccines, as y'all know, usually take 10 years, and they're going to have vaccines ready within a year. It's really incredible. Really is amazing. Surprised it wasn't the Israelis who did it, but I'll take a German vaccine. You know,
The Israelis-
with a German company.
There is one in Israel too. That
Yeah,
they've
the
been
Israelis
talking
said
about.
they have one. They've said
Yeah.
that they are currently looking at it. It's highly effective, and they were talking about it in today's paper.
Actually,
Yeah.
the CEO of Pfizer is a Jew from Greece.
Oh, yeah, I heard that. And Netanyahu's been on the phone with him, and I think Israel's working to purchase that vaccine.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of logistic challenges because it has to be so cold. It has to be negative 94, I think, or 90 degrees, something like that.
-90.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Johnson & Johnson one, which may not be available till February, could be even better, and that's only a one-time shot. So that could be a really nice thing once that's available. That'll be really, really good.
The rabbis get first online.
I wish.
You're essential workers.
If I,
Rabbi.
you know, if I was in my 70s or 80s, I would be first. I think I'll be one of the last. I haven't gotten a chance to go to the hospitals since this whole thing. They won't let clergy in the hospitals, which I understand. I completely understand, but it's hard because I'm used to going to the hospitals a lot. And so it's a lot of FaceTime and Zoom with people in the hospital. And a lot of phone calls, but it's weird not getting to go to visit the medical center. But it's a different deal. Well, let's see here. I think we got a lot of people here. I appreciate everyone who tuned in to this evening. Why don't I go ahead and begin, and Marty's going to introduce our speaker tonight. I just want to remind everybody is that our next 100 Jewish Men is December 9th. That's Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. We're going to have Chandler Rome, who's the Houston Chronicle beat writer for the Houston Astros. Lots to talk about. We'll be in the midst of the off season, and a lot of questions about potential free agents and how the team went this year and the future. I'm sure Jeff Lunau will come up, and so there'll be lots to talk about. So that's December 9th. And just a reminder of a couple of things. Next Friday night, November 27th, the day after Thanksgiving, we're having our second outdoor service, Shabbat Renewal outside. Last month, we had about 100 people there. Everyone will get their own little parking spot. You're not near anyone else. You have to wear your mask, but we're outside, so it's a little bit safer, so we can let more people come. And we have our Shabbat Renewal band there. It was a lot of fun. So sign up now on our website. That's November 27th. We've got a lot of classes, programs, events, and if you miss something, you can find it on our YouTube page. I mean, almost every day we've got something to keep you busy, to learn, to be enriched. And of course, if you want to come to services, you just got to register online. We're letting up to 40 people in our morning minyan and our evening minyan, all socially distanced, very safe environment. Thank God we've had no problems. May that continue. But it gives anyone who needs to say Kaddish or just wants to come to shul and pray the opportunity to do so. And of course, our Greenfield Chapel community is meeting in the Freeman Lever right now to maximize the amount of space. So just go to our website or email me or Jennifer Rosenzweig with any questions that you have. Jennifer is on the call tonight as well as our moderator, and she's our extraordinary program director. So feel free to always reach out to any of your clergy or to Jennifer or to Andy Berger or Jared Bloom, our president, with just any questions, anything you need. So guys, thank you for being part of it. It's our third event of the year. And I look forward to this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to Marty Peskin to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi. All right, let's talk about Mayor Andrew Friedberg. All right, he is an honors graduate of Bel Air High School. Andrew completed a triple major in economics, finance, and government at the University of Texas in Austin. There he was named Parents Association Outstanding Student and received the University President's Leadership Award, among others. After graduating at UT, where he was first in his class, he earned his law degree with honors from Harvard Law School and served as a judicial law clerk at the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Prior to returning to Bel Air, Andrew served 6 years in the United States Army National Guard as administrative specialist for a military intelligence unit and was awarded the Army Achievement Medal. He was elected mayor of Bel Air in November of 2015. He had previously served 6 years as a city councilman, and before that was a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. An attorney in the oil and gas industry, he has been involved with the Houston Bar Association and is a graduate of the Houston Young Lawyers Association Leadership Academy. Among his other community activities, Andrew also is an active member of the Bel Air Historical Society. And Andrew does have ties to Beth Yeshurun, as he went all the way through the religious school. He had his bar mitzvah there and was even married in our chapel only on a few days' notice after being flooded by Hurricane Katrina. And it was co-officiated by Rabbi Rosen and another rabbi from New Orleans. He and his wife, Jennifer, have 2 children, a son and a daughter. And his son last week was a member of the Bel Air Little League championship team, which beat my nephew's team. Without further ado, let's welcome Mayor Andrew Friedberg.
Thanks very much, Marty. And especially the last part of that introduction, I'm going to assume Jeff put you up to that.
Yes.
Pretty excited in our family there. But yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. Very kind, and actually sounds like something I would write about myself. So thank you for that. And thank you, all the 100 Jewish men, for inviting me to speak tonight. Taking a look at the roster of speakers that you've got lined up for the year, it's a pretty distinguished group. And so I'm especially honored to be included among them, even if that may come with a bit of additional pressure living up to that. I also took note, learning more about the program and the description of what you're all about, the idea to explore what usually remains unspoken in men's lives through controversial, thought-provoking speakers. And I thought that is great, since controversy is definitely at the top of my list of things I try to avoid on a regular basis. But hopefully I can at least be somewhat thought-provoking, and the notion of exploring what usually remains unspoken, I'll take that as an invitation to try to be candid and direct in my comments, which I usually try to be anyway. As Marty mentioned, having grown up at Beth Yeshurun, I feel quite at home coming to speak to you, although that's easy for me to say tonight since I literally am at home, as are all of us. So hopefully it won't be too awkward trying to do this virtually by Zoom. I gather you guys may have more experience with it than I have up to this point, trying to make presentations in this fashion. But I am glad that we have forged ahead with tonight's program, notwithstanding the need to do it virtually. If nothing else, it's given me an excuse to put on a coat and tie for the first time in what feels like quite a while. I'll just ask, please don't ask me to stand up at any point during the presentation, and we're going to be just fine. Not to give you the wrong idea, I can assure you I am definitely wearing pants. I'm just embarrassed at having forgotten my belt. But I'll confess to you, I was tempted to do that. Standard work attire, being what it is these days, coat and tie and gym shorts. Manish tana, I thought, why not tonight? But incidentally, I think that highlights one of those limitations of trying to give a presentation on Zoom. As you can tell, and some of you who know me know that I fancy myself a pretty funny guy sometimes. But tonight I'll have no way of knowing whether any of you are actually laughing at my jokes. And so I'm just going to assume that you did, and that'll make me feel good about myself. Give me just a second here, because it looks like my phone is ringing and I'm trying to not be interrupted when the answering machine comes on. One other thing about being on Zoom, I guess, it's a little bit weird not being able to see and interact in quite the same way with my audience. Like any good politician would do, ordinarily I'd begin my presentation by asking all of the Bel Air people to get together into one section of the room, since they're the ones that I actually want to talk to. That's another of my bad jokes, by the way. Of course, I'm just kidding. But like before, I'm going to assume at least some of you may have laughed at that. In all seriousness, I don't consider myself to be a good politician at all, and that's because I don't consider myself a politician. Actually, it's really my favorite thing about serving in local government in Bel Air is that you don't need to be a politician. You don't need to be some kind of hotshot in order to serve. Local government is by design nonpartisan. Don't have to worry about selling out to a party platform. Don't have to raise millions of dollars for nasty, ugly campaigning. You can literally knock on doors to reach the voters. And I'll put a bookmark there. I intend to come back later on toward the end of my comments to this idea of nonpartisanship. But just to give you the overall idea as to why I don't consider myself a politician at all, and really I conceive of my role in the city as being more of that of a citizen volunteer. And while we're on this subject, it's a point I always try to include when I'm speaking to various groups, because it's not always so well understood, particularly here in the Houston area. And that's the distinction between our form of government in Bel Air and the other small cities around versus what people are more accustomed to in Houston. Over in the city of Houston, as you're very much aware, the mayor is actually the boss over the whole organization. He is the chief executive. Whereas in Bel Air, as is the case in more than 85% or so of Texas cities, we have a full-time professional city manager. And those of you living in Bel Air may be aware that at the moment we're actually between city managers, but that's neither here nor there for our purposes. The city manager is responsible for running the day-to-day affairs of the city, and all the staff report to him. So for example, if a resident calls up and needs to have a pothole fixed on their street, I can't just call the public works director and order them to do it. Public works doesn't work for me, they work for the city manager. So it's very much analogous to a corporation in that the city manager is the CEO and the city council being the board of directors. And as mayor, that makes me the chairman of the board of directors. So that form of government, and I've gone into a bit of detail about that just to help in explaining why I see more my role as being that of a community volunteer. I get to serve my community and keep my day job, which is some of you who are also lawyers can probably relate, or better yet, Rabbi, if you're married to one, or worse, if you have a two-lawyer household, that alone may be cause for me to revisit my life choices. But again, that's neither here nor there, because tonight I'm speaking to you as the Bel Air mayor. And hopefully that little intro that I just went into gives you some idea of how I approach the job, and importantly, why I don't see myself as any kind of politician. Ultimately, my goal tonight and the time that we have allotted is not just to talk endlessly at a computer screen, but to hopefully get some discussion going. And in that regard, by all means, I'll welcome your questions. Jennifer advises that typically we'll kind of hold those until the end, but however you guys want to do it works for me. Just keep in mind that you will want to ask questions because that's your primary respite from having to listen to me talk. So what I thought I would do tonight is provide you a bit of an update on Bel Air's experience up to this point through the COVID pandemic. And then after that, I'm guessing at least someone in the audience living in or around Bel Air might perhaps be interested to hear about our recent sidewalks election. And so I want to make it a point to talk about both of those things. But otherwise, my hope is to leave plenty of time to talk about the things you're most interested in and to try to generate some interactive discussion. So starting with COVID, I trust it goes without saying this is not a competition. So that's not at all my intent in making comparisons between Bel Air and other communities, but rather just to put our experience into some perspective. According to the most current figures I've seen in Bel Air, we have so far had 268 confirmed cases of COVID, of which 245 have recovered, leaving 23 currently active. Remarkably, we've had 0 deaths in Bel Air so far, and I'm going to knock on wood as we pray that continues to be the case. And I should be clear that the statistics are kept according to where you reside. And so those numbers are only for Bel Air residents. COVID certainly has hit close to home here. As some of you may have seen in the news quite recently, we lost one of our prominent local business owners, not a Bel Air resident, so he's not included in those numbers, but is a member of our community all the same, and we certainly feel his loss. By comparison, again, just for perspective, we've had our 268 cases and 0 deaths, while throughout Harris County, there have been more than 170,000 cases and more than 2,300 deaths. And in looking at those numbers, it has certainly never been lost on me that there are very material differences between our community and others that are relatively affluent like ours compared to other parts of the county. Bel Air residents, for example, are generally not reliant on public transportation to get around. In our single family residences, we're obviously more socially distanced from our neighbors than are those living in crowded apartment complexes. Generally speaking, a greater percentage of our residents, myself included, are in professions that have allowed us to work remotely from home rather than in the hands-on services industries, for example. A notable exception, of course, being the doctors and other healthcare professionals who live in Bel Air and have been on the front lines of this pandemic, which of course we all very much appreciate. And so I don't in any way mean to overlook them in my assessment of how Bel Air has fared and why that might be. But again, generally speaking, I think these characteristics help at least somewhat in explaining our numbers. Plus, I think there's a cultural element to it. I'm proud to say that we have a high rate of compliance as our residents are generally doing their best to follow the public health guidelines and are doing their part to help limit the spread. But again, it's not lost on me that relative to other communities, we are in the fortunate position of being able to take those precautions without the risk that we won't be able to provide for our families as a result. I'm guessing in that vein, some of you will likely have seen the New York Times piece back in July, I think it was, in which I was quoted in a couple of places in the story. And in my interview with the reporter, I made it a point to express these same sentiments that I'm sharing with you tonight, because I do think that they're reflective of those widely held throughout Bel Air, that this is really tough. The whole COVID situation has been very challenging for everyone. But at the same time in Bel Air, we do recognize our blessings and we're grateful for them. And we have the utmost of compassion for our neighbors who we know are not as fortunate as we are. And so to be perfectly honest, I was a bit disappointed once the story came out. And it was apparent that the reporter had not totally been forthright with me as to what the article was going to be about. His focus was on the Gulfton area immediately adjacent to Bel Air, which has not fared nearly as well as we have, as you might imagine. And he basically used Bel Air as his foil in telling the story of Gulfton. So it seemed curious to me. He chose not to include any of my quotes, expressing Bel Air's recognition that in the grand scheme of things, we've got it pretty good, and that we do care about our neighbors, including in Gulfton. So yeah, it was disappointing the way they chose to portray Bel Air in the story the way they did. But I guess as the old saying goes, at least they spelled our name right. Turning next to our city staff experience during COVID, and so that you'll know, we have 182.5 full-time equivalents. And among that number, we've had 18 positive cases, so roughly 10% of our workforce. Of those 18, 15 have now recovered, and so 3 of those cases remain active. But when you stop and think about the business of being in municipal government these days, there are some special considerations cities are having to think through. For example, what do you do when your entire police force or maybe fire department, when they all have to quarantine all at the same time? The answer to that question, rest assured, we have mutual aid agreements in other places, in place with other jurisdictions around us. And early on in the pandemic, we reached out to them to ensure that everyone would have adequate personnel coverage in the event something like that were to happen. Again, I'll knock on wood that we've managed to avoid that scenario thus far. Although we did have a situation, I think it was the weekend before last, there was an incident on 610 in which our officers had responded and they were rendering first aid to an injured person at the scene. And they were later informed from the hospital that that person had tested positive for COVID-19. So the entire patrol shift on duty that night then had to be quarantined. Thankfully, no cases that I'm aware of have come out of that among our police officers. But at a minimum, that gives you an idea of the kind of staffing challenges that cities are having to deal with. Of course, that's not limited only to police and fire, although those are certainly going to qualify as the more essential among our city services. And I'll include within that public works as well. But overall, we haven't had it too bad in Bel Air from a workforce perspective. Our big focus throughout COVID has been on maintaining service levels as much as possible, despite all of the restrictions in place. Obviously, public health comes first, but we've tried to do it in a way that kind of maintains a bias towards maintaining services as much as we can. We do know that people are counting on us now more than ever. The garbage still needs to be picked up. Building permits still need to be issued. City council meetings need to be had. And just like with this presentation tonight, we've gotten pretty adept at holding remote governmental meetings by Zoom that are also still fully accessible to the public. By no means is it ideal, but for the most part, it has been working. Another big area for us during the pandemic has been Parks and Rec. At a time when people are needing to get outside more than ever, they're looking to us to provide that service. And yet we're trying to do so in a way that's socially responsible and makes it easy for people to stay distanced from each other. That meant, for example, making the call to close all of our parks over Easter weekend. Not because Easter is so much a park thing in Bel Air as it is in other parts of the Houston area, where that's a bigger part of the culture, maybe based on the demographic makeup of those areas. It's not that we would expect a whole lot of Bel Air residents to descend on the parks for Easter, but because in Houston and Harris County, they had closed their parks anticipating that kind of a surge. And so for us, the consideration was, if ours are the only parks in the surrounding zip codes that are open on that weekend, that we could reasonably anticipate hordes of people who might have been turned away at the other parks, they would now show up at ours, which would not be in our city's interest to introduce large crowds in any of our public spaces. But otherwise, we've endeavored to keep everything open as much as we possibly can, especially recognizing that people really need to get outdoors as much as possible. They're looking for us to make that available to them. One rather interesting metric I'll share with you, we've seen a sharp uptick in tennis court reservations. Seems tennis courts have been almost as hard to get as toilet paper has been at times during COVID. From May through September, our City of Bel Air tennis courts had more than 5,200 reservations, as compared to just over 1,000 for the same months a year ago. So that's a more than 5-fold increase in usage. Another city service that has proven very popular and that we've worked hard to maintain is our library. The building itself remains closed to the public and has been even as occupancy limits were at one point gradually relaxed. And that's for the same reason that we closed our parks over Easter. With the Houston and Harris County public libraries closed, ours needed to be as well, just to avoid the overflow coming to our building. But to keep those services going, nevertheless, our librarians have been very innovative in offering curbside services, including book pickups and also arts and crafts kits they've distributed for families looking for something to do around the house. And as you might imagine, they've also increased their online programming during the pandemic as well. And a new feature actually that we've added, I think in about the last couple of weeks, with the weather being as nice as it has been, they've got pop-up libraries on the grassy area adjacent to the building, so people can come up and in a socially distanced way kind of browse a selection of books as they ordinarily would inside if they haven't already called ahead to book something to come pick up curbside. So the list goes on. Obviously, all of our city departments are doing different things, adapting to the way they provide the city services people expect. But hopefully that little sampling that I've just walked you through gives you at least an idea of our efforts to maintain those city services, even among all these challenges. The last COVID-related subject I thought I'd touch on tonight is its impact on our city finances. As I'm sure you're aware, it has presented a huge problem for cities all over the country as revenues are way down at the same time as demand for services is way up. The Federal CARES Act that was passed by Congress back at the end of March did include within its $2 trillion economic relief package what they called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, and allocated $150 billion to be distributed to state and local governments. In case you're curious, the way the formula works out, just based on your per capita population, in Bel Air, we are expecting to receive a little over $1 million in that CRF funding. And yet, despite that package, the National League of Cities continues to advocate for more funding, not only because of the economic impacts of the pandemic to city budgets, but also because of the important role played by cities in protecting public health during a pandemic, which obviously they can't do without adequate funding. So just based on what I'm reading and hearing and observing, and through the messages I get from the National League of Cities, I have no doubt that in a lot of places it is really, really bad right now. But for our part in Bel Air, I'm relieved to be able to report so far we're doing okay. Make no mistake, we are definitely affected by it. Our general fund revenues are way down in most categories by more than $1 million. We're below our budget. However, that is mostly offset by similar reductions in expenditures over that time. For example, not having to pay part-time and seasonal employees, such as lifeguards, while the pools were closed. So while it's not an exact match, we're quite a bit below budget on both sides of the ledger. Individual categories, it's kind of all over the place, but on the whole, it mostly washes out. And I think the same is largely true on the enterprise fund side. That's where we account for our water and wastewater utilities, all the public work stuff. As you might expect, residential water sales are significantly up with people working from home and they're there during the day and using those utilities, while for the same reason, commercial water sales are down. But all told, the utility fund actually comes out a little bit ahead because the residential water sales have been enough to keep our revenues more or less on budget, while gas expenses are kind of leading the lower fuel costs have and electricity as well have brought down the expense side of the enterprise fund. So, as you can see from all of that, Bel Air has definitely been impacted financially, but overall, I feel comfortable saying we're going to make it out of this okay. Even if the individual numbers are kind of all over the map, at the end of the day, the final balances should still be okay. Which I think invites the question, why are we not experiencing all the doom and gloom that we're hearing about in other cities all across the nation, including Houston, by the way, having a greater impact from COVID than we are experiencing? And I think the answer mainly lies in our being a predominantly residential community. Which in this instance feels kind of backwards because here it actually works to our advantage financially. And I say that because every year at budget time, residents complain that their property taxes are too high. And I don't argue the point one way or the other. I think it's kind of a subjective question. I get it. But I do point out that in light of our residential character, we are disproportionately reliant on residential property taxes as our primary source of revenue. So of the 65% of our general fund revenues that come from property taxes, a whopping 86% of that is collected from residential taxpayers. That's the cost of maintaining that residential character, which is what attracted so many of us to Bel Air in the first place. So it does come at that cost. But during COVID, it's kind of interesting that has worked in our favor in that it has meant greater stability in our biggest category of revenues. With a 99% collection rate, those property taxes are a reliable source of funding. That said, I do look with some worry at the prospect of a prolonged downturn in oil and gas, what that might mean for our future property values. Yes, I work in that industry myself, and so I worry about that on a personal level, as I know many of you do. But that said, we're in it together with all of Houston when it comes to energy and to the broader economy. And so I can't single that out and say that it's just Bel Air property values at stake, but that's something all of us should be interested in. One bright spot during COVID that I think a lot of people have found surprising when I've mentioned it is with sales taxes. For those cities that are more heavily dependent on sales taxes than Bel Air is, they're definitely feeling the sting of COVID as shoppers aren't out there spending money like they usually would. And that is certainly true for our local restaurants and retail here in Bel Air. However, our two largest categories of sales taxes are actually online retail and grocery stores, that being, of course, our big two-story H-E-B. Many people don't realize that online sales taxes are based on where your package is delivered. So all those Amazon Prime orders during quarantine, our sales taxes are actually up over that time. And while non-junk food grocery items are not subject to sales tax, all those really healthy fruits and vegetables I know must be delivered weekly to the Rabbi Strauss household. For a lot of us, my own household included during COVID, wine and beer sales are way up as well. And so that's kind of a bright spot in the financial picture during COVID on the sales tax front. Last thought, final thought about COVID, at least as it relates to cities and to my role, before I move on to my other subject. If there's something that I've learned in all of this in my role, I think it's to have some sympathy for the position the governor finds himself in, having to make some pretty impossible decisions. No doubt, he signed up for the job just as I did for mine. So my sympathy doesn't come in that way, but I can only imagine what it's like when you've got all the public health experts in one ear and the business and restaurant and retail associations in the other. And you know that no matter what you do, it's guaranteed not to make anyone happy. The rest of us are quick to criticize from our armchairs. But while my office in Bel Air is obviously of much smaller scale and smaller importance than his in Austin, I do think that this experience has given me some perspective into what that must be like. And I find myself more sympathetic and understanding and patient as a result. Whether I agree or disagree with a given decision, I know it must be really hard to be thrust into that position in the first place, even if it is something we willingly signed up for. It's also been interesting to see the way things have evolved over time during the pandemic in the sense of how that decision-making power has been divided up. I can understand why the governor's orders, especially early on, expressly superseded all county and local orders to the contrary. You'll remember when Harris County attempted to issue a mask mandate and they were told, no, ma'am, you may not do that. The governor's order expressly prohibits counties from varying from whatever he had ordered. Differences in political party aside, I can understand that approach. I think there is some value in having a uniform statewide response to COVID. But on the other hand, the COVID situation in El Paso or down in the valley might be different at any given time from what's happening in San Antonio or in Dallas or in the Panhandle. So I think what we've seen is that gradually some of those emergency powers have been delegated appropriately, in my view, to the county and the city level. And so for my part, what that has meant is that if you want to have an outdoor gathering of more than 10 people, under the current orders from the governor, the mayor has got to approve that. So yes, I have literally been approving kids' outdoor birthday parties and the like. But overall, in the areas where I do have some leeway, such as in ordering whether our city council meetings are in person or by Zoom, my approach has always been to respect the guidance of the county judge. Whether you agree or disagree with her approach, in my view, government should always operate by the same set of rules it asks the people to follow. So in this case, since Harris County is telling people to stay home as much as possible and to avoid large public gatherings, I don't see that it would be appropriate for the city of Bel Air to say, well, stay home as you're being told, except it's okay to come to Bel Air City Hall for large public meetings. So again, agree or disagree, my view is that government should operate by the same set of rules. And I have occasionally been criticized by those who say the county judge is just playing politics with COVID. And for that reason, I should ignore her. To which critics, my response has been, wouldn't I be playing politics just the same to declare that Bel Air is not subject to the same set of rules as the rest of the county? So that's been my approach and how I look at what I hope is not a political question, but I understand the politics of the decisions having to be made in our area. And perhaps that'll serve as a good segue to my other topic that I want to touch on this evening, and that's to hopefully be pretty brief in filling you in on our recent sidewalks charter election. I'm going to assume that geographically, most, if not all of us, are generally near kind of the area and may be familiar with what I'm talking about. Those not familiar with our recent election, I'll try to give you the short version. Which is that Bel Air has been fighting about sidewalks since the beginning of time. And it tends to come up every so many years. Those who have had some experience in Bel Air city politics understand that's a third rail and you just don't touch it. But somebody did, and it last blew up in 2018. And after hours and hours of angry public comment and standing room only council meetings, the city council listened to all the residents who came to speak and responded. And all plans for new sidewalks were canceled, and that was the end of it. However, notwithstanding that result, some of the residents who opposed sidewalks felt that it never should have even come to that. They should not have had to go down to City Hall to argue over it. And so they set out to initiate by petition, as is their right, 3 propositions to amend the city charter, which is in essence our city constitution. And what those propositions were intended to do is to take sidewalk decision-making out of the ordinary public process so that it could not be brought back up ever again. The issue has historically tended to come up every so often, but the idea was putting it in the charter as opposed to leaving it up to the usual legislative process would resolve the issue for good, and we don't have to go down and fight City Hall anymore. And so that was back in 2018. But thanks to a provision of the Texas Constitution, cities may not amend their charters more often than every 2 years. And our charter had last been amended during our regular city council election cycle in 2017. So 2017, doing the math, that should get us to 2019. But wait, there's a snag in this. Election day in 2017 fell on November 7th, and in 2019, it was November 5th. So that meant that it would fall short of the constitutional waiting period by a mere 2 days. The cutoff would have been November 7th of 2019, but because the uniform election date, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November was November 5th, they missed it by 2 days. So that meant the earliest we could hold the petition for charter election would be in 2020. There are 2 uniform election dates in May in Texas, one in May and one in November. And so we scheduled the election at the first opportunity we could, which was in May of this year. But then, as you might imagine, thanks to COVID, we were forced to postpone it to November. So that's how we ended up with this sidewalks election more than 2 years after the latest sidewalks controversy that had led to it. But understood in proper perspective, and this is really what I want to share with you tonight, this election was never really about sidewalks at all. As I described earlier, and please understand, it's not my intention in any way to take sides. That was for the voters to decide. Rather, it's my intent just to explain how we got here and what it all means. As I described earlier, the latest sidewalk proposals had already been canceled back in 2018. And what the charter propositions were about was not so much asking the voters for or against sidewalks, but rather about who should make that decision. As I wrote about in my mayor's blog the day after the election, and there's the shameless plug, I've been looking to work into my presentation somewhere. So for those of you who haven't read any of my stuff, I certainly invite you to take a look at it through the link on the city website. I wrote in that blog post that fundamentally what this election was about was the relationship between a self-governing people and its duly elected city council. And so viewed in proper perspective, this was really nothing more than a referendum on the 2018 city council, except that it came 2 years too late. And in the interim, our regular 2019 city council elections, in that cycle, they had already thrown out all the incumbents who were up for re-election. Yours truly accepted from that. And so I think if you go back to 2018, when the petitions were circulating, it's probably because they did not anticipate what the results in 2019 would be. The ordinary process is if you're unhappy with city council, just elect a new one, and that's what they did. But by then, the ball had already kind of been set in motion on this charter election. And so that's what ended up happening a couple of weeks ago, in November 2020. So you remember when I said much earlier on in my presentation, I'm hopeful that some of you are still awake at this point, that I wanted to return to the idea that local government is supposed to be nonpartisan. Well, this was the subject of that blog post I mentioned the day after the election, shameless plug number 2. Honestly, I don't think I could express myself on this subject any better than I did in that writing. While it remains true that our local government is neither Democrat nor Republican, man, it just seems that we are bent on dividing ourselves just the same. Now, if you really wanted to hear me talk for hours, I could give you a complete narrative history of Bel Air that puts it all in an even greater perspective, but I doubt that's what any of you all want to sit through tonight. The basic point here, and as it relates to this sidewalks charter election, is that in my view, it's merely symptomatic of a much deeper divide that has nothing whatsoever to do with sidewalks. In fact, sadly, many, or dare I say most of the folks who got really caught up in this bitterly divisive election didn't even have the historical perspective to realize that this was about something much more than just sidewalks, that they were caught up in somebody else's war. And again, that goes way beyond the scope of my remarks tonight. Could probably even be a course for college credit. I have a lot to say about it, but to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, you need only look at the obvious transformation that Bel Air has been going through the past several decades, all driven by real estate values, mind you, given our proximity to downtown, the medical center, and the Galleria area where I work. Real estate values have driven a very obvious transformation in the development character of the city. And we have seen over the past several decades the gradual replacement of the original post-World War II era, single family, the single story ranch house inventory being replaced with today's admittedly rather over the top McMansions on small urban lots. And understand, I'm not throwing any shade on that, at least not figuratively, as I myself am speaking to you tonight from one of said newer homes. But with that physical transition in the city has come some important changes in our demographics and also resident expectations of city services and a changing vision for what the future of the city should look like. And so in my estimation, we're kind of in the middle of a tug of war over what does Bel Air want to be when it grows up. And that's just kind of the quick Cliff Notes version, but hopefully I've given you enough of that perspective to see how it has come to be that we are so divided. And that's what you saw play out with all of the vote yes signs and all the vote no signs all throughout Bel Air leading up to this sidewalk charter election, just how divided we are. Again, not along party lines, but we have become intensely divided just as if our local government were partisan. And now I have the numbers to prove it. As I said, there were 3 propositions on the ballot in this recent charter election. And Proposition A was decided by a margin of 50.74% to 49.26%. And if you didn't think it could get any closer than that, Proposition C was even closer, 50.67% to 49.33%. And then Proposition B had a slightly wider margin of 52.06 to 47.94. So if ever there was proof that every vote counts, we proved that with this election. But what does that all mean going forward? Well, obviously, just taking it at face value, those numbers show that we are not only divided, but we are extremely evenly divided. I mean, you couldn't get more split down the middle than that. But thinking about it a bit further and really trying to analyze these results and what they mean, what we see is that it paints a very different picture from the prevailing narrative back in 2018 when everyone was all bent out of shape over these sidewalks and it was all very one-sided. And it paints a very different picture from the election results in 2019 when all of the council incumbents who were up for re-election that year were thrown out. We had a 28% voter turnout that year, and the election results were certainly more decisive. But this year, and for obvious reasons, our voter turnout was nearly 84%, and the results were not even remotely as skewed as they were in the 2019 council races. And so, as I said before, I'm not intending to take sides here, but just offering my observations. What I think this means going forward, it does represent a rather tangible shift in power in Bel Air, and that neither side can claim to have the great mandate that past elections might have suggested. And that maybe, just maybe, what we can learn from this is that we should try to stop acting as though local government is partisan. Let's instead respect the fact that it's not, that we should form our opinions on the merits of individual issues rather than just sticking with our team and making everything about us versus them. So in closing, there are obvious parallels between what I'm saying at the local level and what we are all witnessing at the national level. And it's not for me to try to explain all of that. I don't purport to have the wisdom to know how to work our way out of that. But for, even for those of you who don't live in Bel Air, perhaps some of what I have said will have resonated with you as it relates to that broader divisiveness we're seeing as a society and as a country. So those are the two topics I wanted to be sure I got to tonight, and I think I've just about hit my time. So I'll thank you again for honoring me with the invitation to speak. And like I said, I'm interested in talking about the things that are of most interest to you. And so certainly I want to make sure we have time for any questions you guys may have.
Well, Andrew, thank you. And I do want you to know that during this pandemic, I've definitely paid my share of sales tax for beer and wine, much more than I normally do during any other time of the year. So I'm glad to fascinating information and always very knowledgeable. Andrew, thank you. And I want to open up the floor to any questions. You can go to the chat function on the Zoom, like we've done the last couple of times. And if you have any questions that you wanted to ask Andrew, and while people are thinking about questions, Andrew, I'll start. I remember you and I had coffee right after Hurricane Harvey, and we talked about what had happened. As you know, most of Southdale, where I live, flooded. A lot of homes in Bel Air flooded. I know that the task force gave the report about maybe a month ago about 3 potential plans to fix some of the flooding issues in Bel Air. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your prediction is on what you think the city will do and what the city has done since Hurricane Harvey?
So there's probably another college credit course we could go into with all of that. To clarify just a very slight point, the report that you're referring to from a month or two ago was the initial deliverable from the engineering team responding to Bel Air's call for, we want very grand ideas. Let's leave, no stone unturned. Let's look at all the possibilities out there. And we're doing that in partnership with Harris County and with TxDOT, because the most meaningful flood relief that we are going to achieve is necessarily going to be the regional flood relief. We can have all the local city drainage we want, but if there's not adequate downstream capacity for Brays Bayou to take that water and carry it away, we're toast. So we recognize the need for meaningful, out-of-the-box, big picture type solutions, and we succeeded in forming partnerships with the regional players, because this really is a regional issue. I kind of joked at the time, this seems like a pipe dream, literally, because we're talking about, I think the cheapest option is $700 million, of which Bel Air would obviously have to cough up its share. But TxDOT recognizes that, and as some of you may be aware, all of our drainage infrastructure utilizes the street right of way, and so 610 is no exception. There is a large but severely undersized drainage system that runs down the heart of 610. And so we are dependent on that in Bel Air, as is Meyerland, by the way. And so too, obviously, with Brays Bayou. Interesting thing about Brays Bayou, y'all will remember that at the time Harvey hit, the Brays Bayou improvement project was already like about half completed. And I'm doing this from memory here, but I want to say flood control district estimated 12,000 homes were saved just by the 1/2, completion that they had reached at that point. So we already benefited from the Brays Bayou improvements, but unfortunately they weren't completed enough to have saved those homes that did flood. And I say this as someone who has flooded a home before myself. Believe me, I've been there. I totally get it, and we're all in this together. But I think that where we are with those engineering ideas, these are astonishingly expensive propositions. But as I'm fond of questioning, when you think about these things from a governmental perspective, can we afford to do them? My question is, can we afford not to do them? And so I think a lot of tough decision making is going to have to happen. And it's not just folks who are in government, but we're relying on residents of this area to speak up and say, here's where I want my tax dollars to go and here's what I'm willing to pay for it. An alternative view might be, gosh, Houston, you sure are spending a lot of money and effort trying to push the water down. Why don't we just push all the houses up? It would be cheaper to tear down every one of your houses and just rebuild them and let the government do that for you, because that's cheaper than building these crazy pipe dream ideas that are literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Boy, that's a very personal and difficult question. I mean, these are people's homes, it's people's livelihoods, it's people's retirement nest eggs. So yeah, I'm not going to sit here today and tell you we have all the answers figured out. What I will say from Bel Air's perspective is knowing that we are necessarily dependent on factors outside our borders and therefore outside our control. The first and foremost step we've done is to make sure we bring to the table Harris County Flood Control District, TxDOT, Army Corps of Engineers, anybody we can get on our side to say we need to attack this in a way that benefits our entire region, not just us. So I hope that's responsive, Rabbi, to your question. Maybe more than you wanted to hear.
No. I mean, do you think Bel Air will end up, well, I guess it just depends on what the other entities around the city decide to do, which will direct what kind of bond issues Bel Air will do in terms of projects in the city.
Yeah, we'll have our share. I mean, I can give you actually a more specific example. And if anybody lives in 77081, so just to my west across Maple
That's
Ridge,
me.
Chimney Rock area, you may have received a notice recently that the Richmond Plaza improvements finally are coming. And so City of Houston is going to do in that little corner, if any of you can picture, if you're familiar with Bel Air's boundaries, there's that little inexplicable cutout where no one really knows why the streets go from red to green back to red again on the other side of Chimney Rock. But they're going to be redoing those streets with drainage, and a big chunk of that is going to be Chimney Rock. Well, when you're driving down Chimney Rock, you're going to be from Bissonnet south to close to Beech Nut. I guess where Maple hits is kind of where that Cypress Ditch kicks in. But a segment of Chimney Rock belongs to Bel Air and the rest of it's Houston. And so, yeah, why wouldn't we want to coordinate where we can get the whole thing done? And yeah, we're just going to pay our proportionate share. So those are the kinds of things that on a more local level, I think, get to what you're talking about. The problem with these massive tunnel concepts and really huge conveyance north-south arterials, the sheer amount of money that's involved. And Bel Air can't pay for that. We know we can't. We're never going to be able to pay for that, nor should we have to. But again, we are reliant on our partners who need to understand that we pay county taxes just like people who live in the unincorporated areas of the county. But are we getting our share of that money back to us?
Andrew, someone asked the question. It's a good question. You're busy, you're a father, you have a full-time, very demanding profession. What made you decide this is a volunteer position? You're not paid to be mayor of Bel Air. What inspired you to take this incredible commitment on?
I guess the short version of the story is it was actually kind of by accident. I never intended to. Before we ever had kids, living in Southdale and kind of doing our neighborhood walk, I was bored. I was billing a lot of hours at a fancy pants law firm downtown and was looking for something else to do to kind of devote some attention. And it was actually my wife, who at the time was the Houston Chronicle reporter covering Bel Air and Westview, A-Leaf. And she suggested, they have these citizen boards and commissions that you can, sign up and interview and try to serve the community that way. So that's how I ended up on the Planning and Zoning Commission, was kind of by chance, and never envisioned running for office in any way, shape, or form. But I was sort of talked into it. One of the council members at that time, and I think he came to regret it, but he talked me into running for city council. So I managed to win that race and found myself on council. Never would have envisioned running for mayor. I didn't see myself remotely electable, and it wasn't of interest to me. Plus, there was somebody far more qualified than I am that everybody sort of expected would become the next mayor. And when she finally convinced me, dude, don't you get it? Everybody's looking to you to step up and do it. It was just something I kind of fell in my lap. And being service-minded as I am, I'm often asked to speak to high school kids or middle school kids and try to not preach to them, hey, you should get involved in civics. That may not be their thing. Your thing might be in sports, or it might be in Cub Scouting. Mine happens to be in local government service. I like to think I'm halfway decent at it, but it's also something I enjoy and feel like I'm making a contribution. So yeah, it does come at significant sacrifice. I won't deny that it's primarily unfair to my wife, who is essentially a single mom much of the time. given that I'm trying to work 2 jobs and trying to not do a pitiful job at either one of them. So yeah, I would say it's a family service. It's not just my individual service, and that goes for everybody who steps up to serve their community. So that's kind of how my story, how I ended up where I am, quite by accident, as I say.
Andrew, I know you don't consider yourself a politician, but I have to ask, and there's someone's asking, do you have any political aspirations beyond Bel Air?
Had you asked me that probably 20 years ago, I'd say yes, that was my interest. I majored in government. That was something of interest to me. I think what I've come to really appreciate about my role, and you've heard me emphasize so much tonight that we're nonpartisan, to me that means everything. I enjoy serving in the role that I'm in. I don't relish the idea of what our real politicians have to do. I appreciate their service, but that's a completely different ballgame. And I don't think that speaks to me the same way that the local level does. But it's a question I get all the time, as you might imagine, because a lot of people might see my role as a stepping stone. For someone who kind of fell into it backwards, that was never my plan.
Well, I hope you do, because I think you've done a phenomenal job. And I know I speak for a lot of people. 2 more questions right now. Someone wrote, how excited are you that the New York coffee shop and bakery is opening soon at Bel Air and Chimney Rock?
I think we're all ecstatic. I know that COVID has put a damper on those plans, but as it is now, we're driving over to Hillcroft to get to the bagel shop, and now I'll be able to do it right here in my own backyard. But I'm friendly with Sagion, and I'm excited for the new life he's breathed into what was already a very successful, local community institution. In fact, I was reading the Jewish Herald Voice piece on it earlier today, where they emphasize the point that they're also able to serve the Kashrut community through their certifications. And so it's not just about going and dining in necessarily, but having another catering option for to fill that need in our Jewish community. So that's just awesome. And they have the floor, the square footage to be able to do it.
It's definitely a win-win. They're good people. It's going to be great. Another great addition that we can fully enjoy when this whole pandemic is over. One last question. How has your Army service impacted your life in your career and your job as mayor?
Interesting question, because you're taking me back, I don't know, 15 or 20 years now. It was something I had, actually the way I fell into it when I was in college and became friendly with someone that I realized was 7 years older than I was. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with this kid? Why did it take him so long to get to college? And he fills me in. No, I was in the Army all those years. And so I expressed my appreciation for his service and how it was something I always felt I would want to do one day. And he says, well, why one day? You can do it now, even as a student. You're only giving one weekend a month. And so that's how I signed up. And I was in the reserves during that time. And I was in what would affectionately be referred to as a desk job. But I enjoyed that. And for me, I appreciated being part of something bigger than myself. I have greater appreciation for those who are out there, literally on the front lines facing the enemy. That was not my role, but I felt like in my own way, I could be part of supporting them and what they do to keep our country safe. And so just in the same way that I now see myself as a citizen volunteer in my community, it was with that same attitude that I approached military service. And I came away from it with a greater appreciation for those who make greater sacrifices than I ever did. But it felt good to be part of that team, giving them the support they needed to do their jobs well.
No doubt about it. And I think we realized through this pandemic, you hinted towards it earlier, that we can all put even more appreciation for all those, like those in the Army who put their lives on the front lines every day right now. So many people, and we are truly blessed. Andrew, thank you. Thank you for spending some time with us during your busy schedule. Keep up the great work, and keep on doing the great work of representing the Jewish community. And everything you do is Mayor of Bel Air. And if we can ever help with Beth Yeshurun, you have a home here. I remember doing the naming. I think it was a naming for one of your child long time ago. Yeah. So I always enjoyed it. Keep us posted, and thank you again. And guys, thank you for being part of this evening. Well, the next 100 Jewish Men again is December 9th. It's 7 p.m. With Chandler Rome of the Houston Chronicle. In the meantime, we'll hope to see you at services or another virtual event at Beth Yeshurun. Be safe, everyone. Have a safe Thanksgiving.
Thanks so much.
Heat road, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.
The heat road.
Heat road.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty.